Welcome to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronymus. Laura Kortner is our executive producer, and Anita Brockington, our engineer. Jesse Woodson James, known as Jesse James historically, was, according to most accounts, quote, an American outlaw, bank and train robber, guerrilla, and leader of the James Younger Gang, unquote. Joining us this hour is Daniel J. Duke, the great-great-grandson of Jesse James, who in the course of his own discoveries based on his mother's sleuthing, found out that Jesse James did not die as told, but faked his death and lived out his final years under the name of James L. Courtney. Duke reveals how this very same person was connected to the Knights of the Golden Circle, a secret society that buried gold for the Confederacy across the United States, and that his great-great-grandfather was deeply connected later in his life to the Freemasons, the Knights Templars, and used sacred geometry, including the Kabbalah's Tree of Life, as a veil to show where great treasures were hidden from Oak Island's Money Pit to Victoria Peak in New Mexico. Duke maintains that these esoteric patterns, such as the Etz Chaim or the Tree of Life in Kabbalah, is used worldwide as a template and can reveal where other Templar and Freemasonic treasures are scattered around the world. His book, Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure, Secret Diaries, Coded Maps, and Knights of the Golden Circle, are a Destiny Book 2019 release. Thanks so much for joining us, Daniel.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I have to say, you completely threw me for a loop. You know, sometimes you look at these little books when the publishers send you and go, oh, I love the topic of diaries and coded maps and hidden treasure. And I'm thinking, oh, this will be simple. You have covered so much ground, so many centuries, so many issues, so many esoteric traditions that I'm not sure I can do justice, truthfully, to all that you have shared. But I'm going to count on you to do it. So why don't we first start with a bit of an overview on who Jesse James was as publicly known as an outlaw.
Okay. Jesse James was, he's been labeled by some in his day and after as America's Robin Hood. Others claim he was a cold-blooded psychopathic killer. And it's always been split down the middle with him. It's either black or white. There's no gray area, or very little. He robbed trains, banks, stages, and he rode with, he had a gang that he rode with ever since the Civil War, actually, right around the beginning of the Civil War, which, I end up getting off into different topics. I have to try to keep on topic with that. There are so many different elements involved with him. You can go off for days on different topics and never seem to get finished.
Well, that's what. So this was the Confederate guerrilla group, the Quantrill's Partisan Rangers.
That's true.
Okay, so that was the group he was supposedly with.
Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
Well, before the Civil War started, about 10 years prior to the official beginning of the Civil War, there had been a lot of fighting, but on the Kansas and Missouri border. Jesse was 14 years old, and he was plowing on his field. He was too young to fight. His brother had gone off to war, so he was plowing his family's farm, and a group of Union-backed guerrillas rode onto their farm. They strapped Jesse to a plow and beat him brutally, rode onto the house, and they pushed his mother around. She was pregnant at the time. Some say that she was strapped to a tree and whipped, and then they hung his stepfather. They didn't kill him, but he had permanent brain damage from it. And that was the main reason Jesse he wanted revenge, and he found a group that would allow him to fight at that young age.
Mm-hmm. Now, your mother, Betty Dorset Duke, was the one who first found out that Jesse James was not only a relative, but that he didn't die as stated. Talk to us a bit about her own desire to find this out, the book she wrote, and because it was really the beginning of your own journey.
Yeah, Mom had heard, like the rest of the family, she had heard growing up all her life that her great grandfather was Jesse James, the outlaw. And then she would go to school or see movies, and the historic version was completely different from the family lore. Everybody stated that Bob and Charlie Ford had shot him in the back of the head in 1882, and that was it. But she wanted, as she grew, she kept wondering about the story, and she wanted to to find out which version was right, our family legend or history. And that's what began her trail of discovery, using our family photographs. That was at the very beginning, a lot of the photographs that had passed down through the family. She took those to qualified experts, the Austin Police Department, Texas Department of Public Safety, and a group out of New Jersey at the time they were world leaders of facial recognition technology. And all three groups verified that our family photos matched the historically accepted photos.
And then what happened?
And well, after that, she thought the world would be thrilled to find that Jesse wasn't killed by the dirty little coward who, shot Mr. Howard, the way that goes. So she contacted the James Farman Museum in Missouri, and they didn't want to hear it at all. They didn't want to hear the story. They didn't want anything to do with it, and they mocked her. So she went back to the drawing board and started finding more research, more evidence. And, we knew we had the photos, but we needed a lot more. She started digging up state and federal census records. We had his diary where he had signed his own name, J. James, and listed a lot of known gang members. And it just kept going from there, and the evidence kept building, and she ended up writing 3 books. After her second book, a group of people connected with the James farm in Missouri had started sending her death threats. And fortunately, the FBI got involved and put a stop to that. And it kind of slowed down. Then she wrote her 3rd book, and a few years after that, she passed away, unfortunately.
So what she was able to do, and with the help of experts, was using DNA and other clues, you could prove that Jesse James didn't die as history recounts, and that, in fact, he had another agenda. He faked his own death in 1882 and lived out his life in Blevins, Texas.
Exactly.
As James L. Courtney.
That's right. So he took the Courtneys were relatives. My mother also proved that. They tried to deny, the so-called historians in Missouri tried to deny the Courtney name had anything to do with it. And we found a lot of evidence showing that the Courtneys were deeply involved with the James family in many ways throughout the years, and had known several generations of them. And it was a logical name for Jesse to take. They were so close, they were related, and he just took one of the names and came to Texas. And a lot of people don't realize Jesse had tried to fake his death once before in 1879, but they didn't have a body, so that hoax didn't go over. Nobody believed it.
Well, and as you pointed out, that after the Civil War, amnesty was given to most soldiers of both sides, but not to guerrilla fighters. And that's one of the reasons he faked his death, changed his name, and lived out his life under another identity. Is that right?
That's exactly right. When he tried to surrender at the end of the war, and it was outside of Lexington, Missouri, he was shot through his right lung. And he lived. He got away, and it took him a long time to heal. But he got shot once. The other guerrillas were being chased down. If they surrendered, they were executed, or they were shot on sight. Mm-hmm. So they didn't really have a lot of a choice.
Wow. And then you point out that once he became James L. Courtney, and we're going to have to jump ahead because there's so many amazing things, that have to deal with his life, that he did become a Freemason, and you did show which lodge he was a member of. But actually, let me step back for a second, because there was a pro-slavery group, the KGC, which hid treasure too, and you show that they had their own template by which to relocate and communicate with each other where their cache was hidden.
That's true. That's what got me when I first began this. A lot of people had said Jesse belonged to the Knights of the Golden Circle. And along with Jesse, there were claims that Albert Pike belonged to the same group, and several other famous people or well-known people. And I believed that. I didn't have any reason to doubt it. But as I kept going on, see, the Knights of the Golden Circle were a secret organization. They were Southern, and their goal during the Civil War was to cause as much, to halt the movements of Northern troops and just cause trouble for them. After the Civil War, their stated goal was alleged to be to gain as much wealth as they could get, any way they could get it, to fund a second Civil War. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I didn't have any reason to doubt that. After anybody loses a war or even a football game in Texas, you always want your second chance. So, so, I didn't have a reason to doubt it, but as I kept researching, the KGC part of the story just didn't hold that much water. First of all, there's no proof that he was a member of the KGC. So they were very secretive, so it would be hard to find proof. He may have been, but after a lot of the discoveries I'd made when researching the treasures, the template that was said to have been a KGC template, I believe was actually a Masonic template and not a KGC template.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these treasure sites they predate anything to do with the Knights of the Golden Circle. So it kind of discounted their involvement.
And yet, as I started to say in the start, you did show that Jesse James, as James L. Courtney, did become a Freemason.
That's true.
Lodge 330, I didn't write down where it was. So
that's one thing that slipped my mind exactly, the lodge number, but yeah, it was not far from his home in Blevins, Texas.
Exactly. And then you there's so many interesting parts to this whole puzzle, because what you show in your book, Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure, really goes back in history, because you talk about so many different treasures. And one of them, and I want to just skip forward for a moment, because this was somebody who, for you, helped confirm that James L. Courtney was involved in things dealing with treasure, and that was in 1937. You said Milton Ernest, or Doc Noss, said he had found a treasure in New Mexico worth $3 billion, which was supposedly part of this hidden wealth, which you commented later the U.S. government took over by expanding the grounds of the White Sands Missile Range in 1955. But you're talking about 320 tons of gold that presumably was part of this whole hidden treasure.
That's true. And it was, if all the accounts of that treasure are accurate, that's an extremely large amount of treasure just in one site alone.
But he confirmed that there was some relationship to your great-great-grandfather, to James Courtney. Doc Noss did, didn't he?
I don't recall that.
Okay, well, I may have gotten that mixed up. There's so many people and so many curious things about this. All right, so going further then, you talk about that this, after you looked at this, the White Sands Missile Range expansion and blocking off where this wealth had been hidden, presumably, that others have confirmed, it led you to another treasure legend of what you called the 7 Cities of Gold and the legend of Cibola. So tell us what that is.
Okay, that goes way back. There was, the Spanish expeditions had been searching for the 7 Cities of Gold, and there were, they'd heard rumors. They'd interviewed other tribes, supposedly had rumors of a city of gold. And a lot of people believe that Victoria Peak was one of those 7 cities. A map that was translated from Pope Pius III, I believe it was. It was a translation of a letter from the Pope which had described the location of what I believe is Victoria Peak. And it was supposedly found in one of the rooms of Victoria Peak, and later hidden by Doc Noss, I believe. But they said he got so paranoid over the years while he was recovering these treasures that he would bury treasures in the desert around that area as well. So he got to where he didn't trust his wife, he didn't trust anybody, and he kept changing business partners, and eventually got a hold of a business partner that assassinated him. But I'm getting off on a different topic. Sorry.
Well, they're all connected, and that's what makes this such a curious story. I mean, the volume of information that you have packed into less than 120 some pages is quite extraordinary. I mean, to me, I'd go, well, why aren't we into 300 pages for this book? Because you have given so much information to any curious reader and anybody associated with the secret orders, hidden treasures, maps, veils, how these things are done, you have really offered a great deal of thought. So let's take our first break, and when we come back, we'll talk some more about Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure, Secret Diaries, Coded Maps, and the Knights of the Golden Circle. It's a Destiny Book 2019 release, and you can learn more by going to www.authordanduke.com. That's www.authordanduke.com.
You are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronymus. I'm Ben Montgomery, author of Grandma Gatewood's Walk and The Man Who Walked Backward and several other books. You can learn more about me and my work at www.gangray.com.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Our guest is Daniel J. Duke. Find more at www.authordanduke.com. We're currently discussing his new book, Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure, Secret Diaries, Coded Maps, and the Knights of the Golden Circle. If you are at all interested in adventures, in treasure, in hidden mysteries, in esoteric wisdom schools, this is a book to read. I mean, you could take your lifetime, I think, and try to put some of this back together again. Daniel, it's so comprehensive. All right, but we're going to just run the audience right through this line of travel that you take the reader on, because we've now gone back to Pope Pius and the Victoria Peak Treasure. That's in New Mexico, right?
That's right.
Okay. And then you jump, oh my gosh, into this real hotbed of issues that is a hotbed today even, revolving around the Bruton Parish Church in Williamsburg, Virginia. I mean, presumably Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and others attended. And this is where, as you put it, the Bruton Parish Vault is so essential to the story of Jesse James, who later became known as James Courtney. So tell us about that.
Okay. After researching Victoria Peak in New Mexico, I'd also come across stories of the Bruton Parish Church in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I for some reason that kept coming back into my circle of research. And so I decided that I needed to look at it even deeper. It kept popping up every time I would search a different angle. I kept coming back to that. And right off the bat, I'd read the book Foundations Unearthed by Maria Bauer Hall.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Manly Palmer Hall's wife.
That's right. And she had talked about, well, she knew where the foundations were of the original church that had existed there based on anagrams she discovered in the works of Shakespeare and on tombstones. And people didn't believe her. She proved them wrong. She proved that all the codes that she had found led her to the original foundations of this church.
Which she connected, before you go too far, which she connected back to Francis Bacon.
That's right.
So we'll come back to that. But I wanted to ask you before you go further, was this all new to you? I mean, you weren't a student of esoterica, and this was not something you were familiar with before you started looking into your own great-great-grandfather's history? That's true.
It was all new to me.
Fascinating.
I mean, growing up in small town Texas, I didn't really have much exposure to that kind of that world. So,
yeah. Well, that's what makes this, to me, what makes this so interesting is that you came in, let us just say, completely blind to the fact that there are so many books written on the history of Bruton Parish Church, so many things written on the 7 cities of gold, and that you came to it as an honest seeker, following the clues you were given one at a time. That's what interests me so much about your book.
Well, thanks. It was definitely eye-opening. Maria Bauer Hall had mentioned a vault that had been placed or buried beneath the original church that had allegedly, she said, may have held treasures and priceless artifacts that dealt with history, historic treasures, and probably some silver and gold, but a lot of historic, earth-changing type secrets or information that we just don't know right now. I don't know exactly what's in there. I believe it may be items of spiritual significance and also historic significance that probably, well, there were a lot of items buried in there. And yeah, I wanted to know if there was any connection or if that was just a completely separate treasure. And I had drawn a line. I got on Google Earth. I drew a line from Bruton Parish Church to Victoria Peak, New Mexico, and it was 1,715 miles. And then, to make a long story short, that number kept popping up. And as I researched over the years, and this didn't happen overnight, it took me years to do this and to discover, but 1715, I started reading works by or the writings of Albert Pike, Manly Palmer Hall, Maria Bauer Hall's books, and other Masonic and anything I could get on, and it kept leading me like Albert Pike, for example. He mentions Kabbalah and Gematria throughout his books. So I thought, well, he keeps talking about this. I need to look deeper into it. And I to make a long story short, 1715 could be broke down to 5 times 7 times 7 times 7. And that, if you apply that to the tree of life, it all fit perfectly in my mind. It could equal, like, behold the tree of life. 777 is symbolic of the tree of life, and the number 5 is the word, I believe, and I'm probably mispronouncing this. I think it's H-E.
Yeah, Hey. It's the letter Hey, which is the 5th letter of the Hebrew alphabet.
Exactly. And the way I deciphered it, it could be translated as behold the tree of life. And I thought, okay, so I started drawing lines to other treasures that had been recovered. One's not 12 miles from me. Wagner Carr, who was a former attorney general for the state of Texas, sent his driver out to show my mother and me where several treasures were recovered. The one that's closest to us ties in with this Tree of Life template, and it was at a 33-degree angle off the main line from Williamsburg, Virginia to Victoria Peak, and I believe it represents the 7th Sephirah on the Tree of Life. And I'm probably saying these terms wrong.
No, that's close enough. The Sephirot okay. are those little circles. If anybody has ever seen the Tree of Life pattern, it's made of these 10 circles that represent not only the human body, but the ladder of light that we climb throughout our lifetimes and that I believe we ascend at the moment of death. It's also a description in prophecy of the stages of humankind, and that we are now at the 9th Sephirot coming down the ladder of light, which is Yesod, the generative organs, the time of looking at who we are, male, female. We certainly see this worldwide, and that we're moving to the very bottom of the Tree of Life within these next couple hundred years, called Malchut, which is the kingdom or sovereignty of the individual, and it represents not only the woman, but our feet and our mouth, and that's kind of like walk our talk. And once we get to the bottom, according to prophecy, we then start ascending as a humanity back up the ladder of light. So what our guest has done, Daniel J. Duke, has taken this pattern, these 10 Sephirot that are connected in a pattern to look like really the human body, the eyes, the ears, the throat, the arms, the torso, the legs, the generative organs, and the feet, is he put it on top of a map of the United States. And this 1,715, you said, was a line, the mileage between Bruton Parish and the riches in New Mexico, right?
That's right.
But you also then, this is where you just kind of leave me in the dust. It's like, it's so wild to trace. It has to do with then Bacon. And again, this whole notion of the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons and the Knight Templars representing a fraternity that has gone on throughout the ages, because Bacon wanted, which they all wanted, universal education and universal democracy. And that was the hidden gold, so to speak, for humanity.
That's right. That's exactly right. When I found out, when I was researching all of this, and, I kept thinking, well, Marie Bauer Hall had mentioned Bacon, and I thought, okay, I need to trace out who started this. It was too amazing to have been just one man. I know Jesse was where I started, and he was an important part in his small area. But it had to have, there's no way he could have been responsible for all this. Plus, it predated him.
Right.
I thought it has to do with a group. The only group I could come up with after discounting the Knights of the Golden Circle was Freemasonry. I knew under his alias he was a Freemason, and there were a lot of other Freemasons that tied in with this. Then talking about Francis Bacon, after reading about his involvement, I thought maybe he's the guy who started all this. And I thought, finally, when I did all the research leading back to Francis Bacon, I thought, good, I found the guy who started this, I can rest. And a few days later, it was nagging at me. I thought maybe it goes further. And I started kind of like a family tree, only for an organization.
Yeah.
And I traced it back to, like his Francis Bacon's mentor was John Dee,
right,
the original
great John Dee.
007.
Yeah.
And he was an amazing man on his own. And then it went from John Dee back through different alchemists, enlightened type people to
various
Paolo
rabbis.
Riccio.
Yeah, you also went back to Abraham Abulafia, who was a great Jewish Kabbalist who believed and hoped to unite the three monotheistic traditions through what they shared. I mean, that was his dream. And then I mean, I love the fact that you included that the Pope, he told Pope, I forget which one, Pope Pius III, was it, about his plans to come to Rome and share this dream with the world. And the Pope said to him, well, I promise you one thing, when you show up, and I'll burn you at the stake. And he still said, I'm coming. And then the Pope died the night before he got there. So Abulafia was jailed and then released. But that's a great story in Judaism for anybody who studies the mystic Kabbalistic tradition. And I'm glad you included it. All right, so coming back, though, to these relationships, because we can't show the picture through radio, but I want to come back, if you don't mind, to the 1,715 and the other numbers that you found, because this correlation between 1,715, which you then break down into other sort of gematriotic values and Hebrew words, and that's what gematria is in the Hebrew tradition. You take words, you break them down into the number values, you can add them, you can subtract, you can do all kinds of things with them, but you then can look up words of the same numeric value in the Hebrew Bible. So a number becomes a name, and a name can become a place or a clue. And you said that this distance between Bruton Parish Church and Victoria Peak is exact, and you show how it's related to the Tree of Life's 22 paths, with numbers 11 through 32. We can't go through all of that. But why is this important in terms of using maps and codes?
Well, you've got, most people didn't know about this, or most people didn't have that kind of information. That was passed down through a lot of the secret societies. I'm sure maybe I would imagine the Catholic Church, people in the Catholic Church probably knew a lot about it, but also Freemasons, alchemists, Francis Bacon, all the people involved, I believe, were well versed in this, or at least well, good enough to get by.
Yeah.
If you're going to hide a treasure, what better way to do it? I mean, most people don't have knowledge of gematria. They didn't know much about Kabbalah. So the people who did, they could speak in terms or write in letters. They could communicate these codes without giving anything away.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful, I believe the belief itself is beautiful. And then the fact that you can hide codes in it makes it just that much more intriguing to me.
Well, and so when you put this map of the United States from 1570, and then you overlaid the Tree of Life pattern on it, it shows you how many treasures have been buried and where they may be. And that's what you've been following.
That's true.
That's wild. That is so wild, Daniel. It is incredible story.
It still amazes me. I told my sister I have to pinch myself every once in a while just to make sure this is true and I'm not dreaming a crazy dream. But, like the veil template, for example, I thought, well, how does this tie in with the Tree of Life template?
What is the veil template? Tell our audience.
The original template looks like a square or a rhombus. It's it was called the KGC template. I've since, during my research, I came to believe it wasn't KGC. It was a Masonic template. It ties in. It looks like a square. It's divided into 8. It's got a circle on the outside, a circle on the inside, 2 concentric circles, and it's divided into 8.
8 sections, uh-huh.
Yeah, 8 sections. Thank you. And it's got little symbols in it that, some were called the turkey track, which I traced back to find that it's not a turkey track or a bird track. It's actually a representation, an ancient representation of what I believe is the tree of life that comes from Egypt. And then there were other symbols, stars, dots, squares, stuff like that. But that template makes up, that's just one cell of it. If you put them together, it's like a grid system that covers the Americas, Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And it made perfect sense to me also, because if you're, most treasure maps, if you leave topographic clues on a map, like an old pirate map, X marks a spot, walk 40 paces from the old oak tree, that's fine for short term. But if it's a long term thing, like these were, topography changes over the years through erosion, weather, fires, stuff like that, development. So if you have a grid system, it doesn't matter what the land looks like. You just go to that coordinates, and that's where you're supposed to be, where the treasure's buried. So to me, that made perfect sense, but I didn't know how it tied in with the Tree of Life template until I came across more on the Tree of Life, referring to the 3 veils of negative existence. And that made perfect sense to me, because the template, the veil template, is one, I explained how it looks. There are 3 sizes, a small, medium, and large, and they all fit together. They work beautifully. And there's not a treasure in each spot on this, but where there are treasures in an area, they're definitely on that template, on the veil template or the Tree of Life template. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's unfortunate it would take us several hours, literally, to take the numbers apart in the gematria that you have shared. But I thought 33, coming back to everybody, is pretty familiar with the 33rd degree in the Masonic practice, and that as an initiate, and you earn that. I loved how you found that showing up in other places. And then you went on to show these correspondences. It's so funny because you don't know this about me, but I wrote 2 books on the Tree of Life. And I did a lot of gematria in the first one on the 7 prophetesses. And I know for a fact, as a person who's done it like you did, it is so enthralling. It is so illuminating. And you think everybody has to know this. You just have to look at all these numbers. But it really carries you away into a spectrum of consciousness that is really quite elevated. And it's a thrill. I mean, I really can relate to your thrill of it all. But let's come back to 33, because you talk about, producers waving, let's take a break, and we'll come back to 33 in about 3 minutes. If you're just tuning in, Daniel Duke is our guest. Learn more about his unbelievably amazing book, Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure, Secret Diaries, Coded Maps, and the Knights of the Golden Circle, Destiny Books 2019, and go to www.authordanduke.com.
This is Rob Cole, author of The Bottom Up Revolution, Mastering the Emerging World of Connectivity. Bottom up is an idea that we need a lot more of, and my book does for bottom up what the people of northern Canada do with snow. They have 50 words for it. We need to have that understanding in order to survive and thrive. You can learn more about it at my website, robcole.com. You're listening to 21st Century Radio with Zohara Hieronymus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. The first caller at 410-922-6680. That's 410-WCBM 680 or 1-800-922-6680. If you know the name of the author we are talking to, you will win a copy of his book, Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure. So I want to come back to, and by the way, I think I was wrong. It was Pope Nicholas III who, Abraham Abulafia, said, hey, I'm coming to Rome. He said, when you do, we're going to burn you at the stake. The Pope died the night before, and he showed up anyway. But you then do this extraordinary connection between Rashi and a lot of other very famous Maimonides, very famous Jewish rabbis who have had so much to do with our understanding of the inner teachings of Torah, which is what is referred to often as Kabbalah, the received tradition. But I want to go back to 33 because you talk about that. A lot of people have used 33, and you showed that it is connected to the temple, to Solomon's temple.
Yeah, it's got a lot of connections in a lot of different places throughout this. Like Francis Bacon, for example, his name spelled out, the gematria of his name in the Elizabethan alphabet equals 33, and then there's 33 in, I believe it stands for, or it can also be translated as meaning to open or reveal. There's so many different meanings with that, and it ties in a lot of different areas on this. It just, that alone, it continues to boggle my mind. It's not just that, the template itself, the veil template, the design of it matches. Well, it deals with the procession of the equinoxes. It deals with the temple in Jerusalem, Solomon's temple, the Holy of Holies, the stone of foundation, and everything that the division, the outer court, the inner court, and then the Holy of Holies, the most inner court. It just. And now I'm starting to confuse myself trying to wrap it all up.
It is a very complicated tradition.
Yes.
And there are worlds within worlds within worlds. And we're just touching on the basics. But I liked the fact that you showed, if you look at 33, and again, we recall the Masonic 33rd degree, that in initiation, Solomon's temple stood for 33 years before it was pillaged. King David ruled for 33 years. Mm-hmm. Christ Juab was crucified at the 33rd year of age. And then you go on to other things about the number 322, and it's half 161, and it adds up to the 66th, the precession of the equinoxes. And so many traditions around the world from ancient Egypt forward have used this. So did the Hindus use these as maps for calculating time. The 2,600, I can't remember the exact number, 621 or something, I think it is. But so coming back, though, to what you talk about is when all of these different orders, and you're going back in time and then coming forward to time, and that these, there's also artwork involved. You found particular artwork that showed the Lyre, the constellation Lyra, which, if you look through a certain lens, stood over the United States when you put the pole star. Anyway, there's a particular kind of map, the Piraeus map and others, that shows that the constellation Bear was over Russia, Lyra was over America, and you touch on that. But you also go, and I'm going to come forward in time again, you showed that Barbara Frail, who discovered a really important, she's an Italian researcher, discovered in 2001 a document from Pope Clement in 1308. And this is important for people who have reverence for the Knights Templars, because they did so much to preserve what was being destroyed on the Temple Mount, and they tried to get it out of Jerusalem, and probably did. They were considered heretics. Many of them were killed for their beliefs. But you point out that there was a document discovered in 2001 by Barbara Frail. Do you want to talk about that a moment?
That was the one that was, is that the one? I'm trying to remember that one.
It was the Pope had absolved the Knight Templars from the accusation of being accused as heretics.
Mm-hmm. And they had supposedly misplaced the document, filed it in the wrong area, so it went unfound for centuries, supposedly. And it just proves that they knew back then what they were doing. They were persecuting innocent people. And I believe that they had to have known, or at least the guys who ordered it. It just, everything about that, it makes me mad when I think about it, but trying not to get too mad about it. I'm not sure where you wanted me to go with that.
Well, I just think it's important because these historical documents that are probably part of the treasure that you've been looking at show us what was intended by these people who believed in the divinity of God and the brotherhood of humankind. And that's still the trajectory of humanity. That's still the direction we have yet to grow into. That's still our mandate as incarnates. And it's so interesting that here the Pope had said that they weren't heretics, even though that was maintained for centuries. And then, of course, King Philip IV of France came along and reversed that decision. But we'll go forward in time, because there are connections between the Dome of the Rock, as you point out, the constellation Lyra, the Tree of Life, the Rosicrucians, Bacon's New Atlantis. I mean, there's so many things. It's so amazing. You come to the Newport Tower, the Truro Park in Newport, Rhode Island, built in 1894. So talk to us about that. That was just another great addition.
Yeah, when I the Vale Templar, I wanted to see how far, and it's hard to do on Google Earth, because if you get too far from your main line, all the lines start coming together. They're off by a mile and a quarter. But I would try to correct it as well as I could, and it lines up with the Newport Tower in Truro Park. It lines up with Oak Island. It lines up with very near to the Scott Wolter's Hooked X, the rune stone in Kensington, that he had tied the Hooked X back to the Templar. It also lines up with the Los Lunas Decalogue stone in New Mexico. And it's all these historic sites, ancient historic sites that have puzzled people for years, and they continue to be topics of debate today on who built it, when did it start. Like the Newport Tower, for example. Some people claim it was John Dee. Other people claim it was a Templar. And if you look at it in a big picture, whether it was John Dee or the original Knights Templar, it was the same group who built it.
Right.
And that amazes me. But it's all tied in with the same group, or people belonging to the same group over centuries. So whether it was John Dee or the Templar, it was one and the same, in my opinion.
Right, and that's the point of the Brotherhood's traditions throughout the centuries. There's a great deal of misinformation, a great deal of conspiracy deformation of what has been a grand design and a grand hope for humanity's evolution ever since we walked out of Eden. And as a student of esoterica my entire life, it has always been very frustrating to listen to groups like PsyCop and other people who demean that which they know nothing about, or those who try to put down the Freemasons as somehow or other being injurious to this country, when in fact they were the great upholders of the brethren of humanity. And as navigators and builders, they were responsible for actually inching humanity along to a much greater state of awareness and shared beingness on the earth.
I agree. I've told people countless times since all the research I've done, I view Freemasons as my heroes. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't for Freemasonry and the Templar before them and all the other, the Rosicrucians, the alchemists, and everybody who came before that, I don't believe we would have a United States.
I think you're right. I think that's absolutely true. And those who know the history of the Masons and their purpose to this day is still to elevate consciousness, still to build a new Atlantis, if you were, an Arcadia, as some have called it, to bring us to our greatest capacity, which is a brethren, before God. And when you look at our own Great Seal of the United States, of the unfinished capstone underneath the divine eye of providence, that is the Masonic story. That is the 13 states, that are the layers of the pyramid, that our work is never done. But we have divine providence overlooking us when we bind our consciousness to that kind of one mind, as Dawson Church would put it, or Larry Dawsey in more modern speak. All right, so what haven't we covered that's really important to you? Because there's so many intimate details we're not going to get to.
Well, what you just covered was, in my opinion, one of the most important points. Why it was put here was it was put here to form a free nation with liberty and freedom. I believe, and also there's speeches throughout history that have, like John Winthrop had mentioned, he had quoted from the Bible, the city, or he'd paraphrased from the Bible, the city, we're like a city on the hill, and you can't hide, the city on the hill. It's for the whole world to see, shining like a light of freedom and liberty. And I'm not quoting that even close to it, but it's just basically the meanings of these quotes that have been taken from like-minded people in these organizations for centuries, and it's their dream became a reality. They were persecuted. They had a common goal for freedom and liberty, and they realized their dream. And we are enjoying the benefits of that.
We have a lot of work to do. I mean, from my vantage point, we inherited an opportunity that we have really diminished through a great deal of war activity around the world and a diminishment of our natural environment and people of all sorts all over this country and elsewhere. But the truth is still the same, and what we seek is still what they sought. And the idea of a united humankind, as my husband always says, we're one people on one planet, we're Earth people. That this is really Earth changes will probably bring us together. We have about a minute or so left. Is there anything about the treasure itself, though? I know you've said that you've now become really interested in the inner treasure because that's really what these organizations were after, but they used physical treasure as a way to finance the churches, to way to finance the universities in order to move humankind forward.
I think, I still want to know. I would love to know what's in some of the more important treasure locations. And I hope one day I can at least find out or have copies of any documents that are located in them. I don't know if that'll happen, but I would love that. I could die really happy.
Well, you are a wonder to behold what captured your soul and what your soul is here to do. You were probably a Knights Templar in another life, Daniel Duke. Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure, Secret Diaries, Coded Maps, and the Knights of the Golden Circle, a Destiny Books 2019. Go to www.authordanduke.com.
Stay connected and stay informed on the #1 news talk station, Talk Radio 680, WCBM, Baltimore, and WCBM.com.
More than